So if you'd like to introduce yourself to our viewers watching.
Hi, Matt. So my name's Candy. I'm a people and talent and culture consultant. I've been working with early stage startups now for the last 8 years. So typically seed funded to Series B. And if you're looking at headcount, that's the first few hires up to about kind of 100 and 120 people. I'm passionate about building companies with a really kind of positive culture that values focused, people led, and I'm a bit of a positive psychology geek.
It's one of the things I really appreciate is people in the network have such diverse range of experience, and in this series you're the first person we've had, I think, who's first person who's worked at such early stages of startups. So it's going to be great to have your experience, your perspective on things.
Thank you.
Could you share the story of what's led you to working on influencing company culture?
Yeah, sure. And I want to say, thank you very much for having me on the show, because I've been a long-term fan of Culturist and all the work that you do, and running some really inspirational events. And I've seen some of the other shows and there's some been brilliant people on it. So I'm really humbled. Thank you. My journey. So I've got quite a long career. It started off in sales and ended up working in technology search and recruitment for investment banks and hedge funds in the city, and did that for 8 years. And in every company I've ever worked with, I've always found myself kind of tinkering around the edges with things that I now understand to be people and culture focused. So always wanting to help improve internal communications and employee engagement, and never really kind of understood that that was something that I was doing. Ended up getting involved in things like CSR. And then eventually...
Corporate social responsibility.
Sorry?
Corporate social responsibility.
Yeah, that's right. And then after kind of 8 years working in the city, pretty much burnt out, and a large part of that, I'll attribute towards poor company culture. I work with some absolutely brilliant people, but for me, the whole kind of methodology of carrot and stick motivation, the way people were incentivized and rewarded, inflexibility in terms of work life, long hours, these all added up to essentially just like a bit of a burnout. So this all kind of coincided with what was then kind of, I guess, the first kind of early beginnings of Silicon Milk Roundabout. And I had a lot of friends who had started working with startups. So I decided to take the plunge and decided that this is a world that I really wanted to work in. I wanted to work with companies that were brave and bold and up for doing things differently. And at the same time, I started doing a master's in sustainability and responsibility. And my thesis was on the correlation between purpose, work, and well-being. And that's when I really kind of got into kind of scratching the surface of positive psychology. And for me, it was a bit of a eureka moment of like, this is how things can be. Why have we spent so long focusing on the negatives when, there's so much good? And reading about things like good work, good money, and the good life, has kind of continued to influence the way I want to work with organizations, but also the way I want to live my life too.
So you mentioned positive psychology, and that's something I'm really keen for us to take a look at. So what, for people who don't know, like myself, how would you describe what positive psychology is?
Yeah, so look, this is a very rudimentary explanation, but it's basically an arm of psychology that emerged a number of years ago, and was based on the premise that psychology, I guess, was very much focused on delving into the negatives and really unpacking those problems, which actually, is useful and good to understand. However, that process is really draining and is not necessarily always helpful. And the idea behind positive psychology is that you explore the good things, the strengths and the positives, and you see what's going on there, and then you use that to help understand how you can improve the weaknesses and the negatives. So yeah, you can see perhaps how that can kind of correlate quite easily to kind of organizational environments straight away, I would have thought.
Yeah, so it immediately makes me think of, how much should we be raising awareness of someone's strengths or a team's strengths, also understand it, being aware of the areas we're not so strong at. Then how much do we focus on each of those aspects? I know one perspective is, well, of the areas that aren't so strong, are there any that are really detracting or taking the shine off the strength? And those ones it is worth working on, whereas some of the others, it might not be, like, you wouldn't prioritize those necessarily. Is that, am I kind of, is what I'm describing an aspect of, or the application of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's so broad, but like a really good example that kind of speaks to that is you've got a team that might not necessarily be working very well together. Now you could jump into why it's not working well together, and you could look at all the kind of problems that you've got. Where positive psychology can work really well, and using something like VIA, Values in Action, which is a strengths-based tool. Clifton Strengths is another one, for instance, that's probably more widely known and used. And you can use that to find the common ground in the team. So where are your shared strengths? So rather than saying, look, guys, this is how we're all really different, what you're saying is actually, here's our sense of purpose, because this is where we all overlap, and this is where we can actually work together and why we can work together. And I think you use that to really kind of calibrate positive working relationships and trust. And then that will enable you to kind of work through the other areas that aren't so strong, because you're forging those stronger kind of more positive relationships, if that helps.
It does. So if, say, someone's watching and they think, okay, this is something I want to explore and bring more into my work. Where would they start? What's a good approach? One thought that comes to mind for me is similar to any aspect of a person's journey experience as part of a company. You'll have, from when they first hear about it to when they apply to it, to the interview process, to onboarding, to being part of it, and development and your career path in it, through to leaving and beyond. Would you kind of look at each of those aspects and look at each of those through the lens of positive psychology and think, how could we bring out more of it? How could we change it to do more? That's the first approach that comes to mind. What's your experience or thoughts on where could someone start if they want to bring more of it into their team or company?
So I mean, initially, there's quite a lot of literature out there that, whilst it doesn't necessarily explicitly label itself as positive psychology, there's books like Dan Pink's book Drive that talks about kind of mastery, autonomy and purpose, that was really influenced by a seminal book on positive psychology called Flow and Happiness. So go out there, do a bit of reading, some great websites that share lots of ideas and tools. And then, see how it works for you. As I say, I use it very informally. I don't go into an organization and say, hey, right, what we're going to do is positive psychology. But, you can start it in kind of the first person. So think about the language that you use on a day-to-day basis. You know, think about the conversations that you have with people, and then you can kind of broaden it. So the way I've used it in the past is if you look at interview processes, for instance, that candidate experience is really, really important. You want that candidate to have a really positive experience. Quite often interviews can kind of really go towards the negative, and you can start getting into some quite dark details around times where you've, you know, dealt with conflict, and we do tend to kind of gear a lot of questions towards the negative, the same as we do with kind of appraisals. So just be conscious about that balance of questions that you're asking. Ask people what they love, you know, ask people what they enjoy doing, and focus on people's strengths and see, you know, how they've used those strengths in their career. And I think you get a far richer like conversation with that individual than you do if you kind of go to a point where you're talking about negatives and draining kind of a lot of energy out of probably both of you at the same time. But you can apply the same to kind of appraisals, and this is becoming more and more common now. You know, I think there is a real movement to kind of move away from the meetings where you sat down and someone said, right, well, you've done this well and this well and this well, but let's talk about what we need to improve. And, you know, all of that feedback is really valid, but it's the delivery that, you know, people walk out and they could have had a great year, but they feel absolutely shattered at the end of it. So there's a kind of couple of examples. You can also kind of, I guess, make a bit of an intervention in conversations. If you're in a meeting and you can see it going to kind of a really negative place, you can try and turn that conversation around and try and steer people towards a more positive conversation, again, with the language that you use and the questions that you ask, and try and kind of find how you can kind of move forward with it. And I guess research has shown that in environments where they are using this kind of more positive approach, people tend to solve problems a lot more efficiently and teams work together a lot better.
One of the things that I'm like going through my own journey on is, so I thought, okay, I'm like in my life, I'm going to make more effort to be more positive. And then I try to like shut out negativity. And then I learned through various channels of feedback, it's not actually that healthy to like shut out the negative stuff. So how, in practice, if someone is kind of focusing on some of the negative things, like how much should I create space for it? How do I know when, like how much to listen, and then when to kind of go for inflection through to turning it into more of a positive conversation? I don't know. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, but
yeah. So look, it's a really good question. And how would I respond to that? So, you know, I think a typical way of framing this. So I think, you know, positive psychology to a greater extent is around how you frame things. And in, you know, in this example, perhaps kind of the way you would look at it. So what can you control? Where do you have choices, and what can't you control, right? So, you know, it's all right for things to be kind of negative, but can you change them? If you can do something about it, and that instantly feels empowering, right? So you can say, right, I can do something about this, and these are my choices. And that, I guess, instantly will start making you feel as though you are able to do something. And then, you know, if you're not burying the negatives, but if you can't actually change something, then you can say, fine, that is what it is. And I will do something about the things that I can do something about, and put my energy there. And, you know, teach yourself not to worry about the things that you have no control over at the end of the day, because there is essentially nothing that you can kind of do about it. So I think it's about how you frame your choices and options at the end of the day.
Yeah, and hearing you say that is, I can immediately, like, it immediately translates to my personal, like, being and thinking mindset, but also in the team. It'll be thinking about, okay, what can we control? What are the constraints that we don't control, and so on.
And yeah, and this is, I guess, we're kind of touching on the topic of mental health and resilience, and these are really hot topics in organizations at the moment, as much as they are for the individual as well, in terms of what we're going through. And if you find the positives, there is a huge body of research that really kind of points towards that people who experience positive emotions on a more frequent basis are actually more resilient. So I guess, from an organizational perspective, if you are really trying to build these positive emotions and experiences into your culture in a really authentic way, you're helping build resilience into your team and work environment, which is kind of what everyone really needs at the moment, I guess.
Yeah, and when you said that, I thought of, I like the way you said in an authentic way, rather than like okay, we're going to be really have fun and be positive here.
Yeah.
I thought, so it would be looking at, I guess, the day-to-day meetings, rituals people go through, but then probably also the policies and processes, and think about, well, how could these be shifted and reframed to a more positive, looked at and guided through a more positive lens than some might be.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of ways, from the tone that you write a staff handbook in, for instance. If you ever kind of got into a company and everything's like really wonderful, and then you read the handbook and you're like, oh god, right? And it's a complete odd. So there's just little things that you can do to just change the tone. It's not what you're saying, it's just how you say it, and that has a really kind of profound and hopefully kind of positive impact.
On the, as you mentioned, well-being.
Yes.
Given like the context we all find ourselves in, whether we are we're no longer working, or whether we are working under a lot more challenging conditions.
Yeah.
What have you been doing for to look after your own well-being? Could you share?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm in quite a, I guess, stressful situation, in that, like, I'm an independent mother, I employ a nanny, I'm self-employed, I've been coming back from maternity leave to this very new and crazy world of work. So yeah, I could quite easily spend all day working, all evening working, and then the rest of my time just being mum. And I think it's really important and healthy to have a bit of balance. So I'm completely unapologetic, and I never let myself feel guilty about doing something for myself, and I make sure I do something for myself every single day. Be it, exercise is great, go for a run, make some nice food, do yoga, just take some time out, in a world where we're not in lockdown, go for a massage once a month, like just do something that makes you happy and give yourself the time and space that you need to do. And that endless list of to-dos that I always have. I used to be a real perfectionist, and I do care about the quality of whatever I do, but I've also just kind of cut myself a bit of slack. And if I don't finish everything I wanted to finish, that's okay. That's that's life. That list isn't going to go anywhere, and it doesn't really ever get any shorter. So I think it's just kind of being all right with what you've got, and again, looking to the positives. And I had a really brilliant piece of advice from my tutor during my masters, and she just said, hold things lightly. And I think that's really stuck with me, because there is so much going on at the moment that can really weigh us down and overwhelm us. And it comes back to that point of, like, what can I control? And I can, the choices I have, and what can't I, and just everything else, just hold it lightly.
I really like that you shared some little gems that we can apply.
Thank you.
So on that similar vein of, well, I think people could be inspired by that. Let's finish on, if someone's looking to influence their company's culture, based on your experience that you've had, which has been pretty diverse, what advice would you give them?
So my main piece of advice for anyone is no matter how brilliant an idea you've got and how much you think you're going to solve a problem, don't do anything until you've really understood the organization and spoken to people and got that data and got that feedback, and make sure whatever it is that you're delivering really meets their needs and wants and is not just a projection of what you think they should have, however well intended. You've got to meet people and the business where they're at. Otherwise, you're going to get frustrated because you're going to be putting in a whole load of hard work and energy and giving them something that doesn't necessarily land as well as you would have wanted it to. And actually, I've just remembered, going back to an earlier question, you were saying kind of what can people do? Active listening is something that is again part of positive psychology. It's really easy, and we forget, we want to go out there and fix things and do things, and actually, one of the most powerful things we can do is sit down and listen to someone with empathy and make them feel heard and understood. And I think that's a really powerful thing to be able to do, especially when you work in a role of a people person in an organization and you're trying to help them move forward.
And when you say active listening, what does that mean?
Yes. So active listening is
what does that
essentially
look like or sound like?
So you pay attention, you're actively listening to the person that's talking to you, and you listen and respond with empathy. So you acknowledge what they're saying, and you ensure that they feel heard and understood. You don't have to agree with what they're saying, but it's giving someone the time and space to talk and allow them to talk openly and honestly, and reflect back to them what it is that they're saying as well, to make sure that you've understood, but also that they've heard what they've said to you. And it's really helpful in terms of building relationships, helping people just talk out some of their challenges and problems, and letting them feel like they've kind of lifted some weight off their shoulders. So and anyone can do that. We all can do that for each other, especially at the moment.
I really like reflecting back so that people feel as though they're heard.
Yeah.
Candy, thank you so much for today. I feel really fortunate. You've the hope, the vision for this was that we would help people discover other people in the community and share our experiences and what we've been learning. And we certainly did that. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. No, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, Matt. Have a lovely evening. And great to have played a part in the series. Thank you.
Thank you. And viewers, we'll be back tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.